Hey guys, today we'll be taking a closer look at the midterm elections that we have in the upper Midwest, specifically the states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, because politically speaking, these four states are the most important states in the entire country. They are pure toss-up races. However, this November, the Democratic Party is doing much better than expected. If you look at the four gubernatorial elections, all four governorships are currently held by Democrats, and many of the incumbents were looking relatively weak. However, they are in a much better position now than they were previously. We also have two Senate races in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Both of these seats are currently held by Republicans. However, the race in Pennsylvania is the only likely flip currently for the Democratic Party. Wisconsin is possible. However, Pennsylvania is much more likely to be a flip for the Democratic Party. So the races in the upper Midwest are going to be crucial this November. If you look at the Senate map, the upper Midwest has many very important gubernatorial elections, and whether or not these Democrats in these governor races in the upper Midwest can win their re-elections will have a major impact on the abortion rights in the region. So starting off with the state of Michigan, where Gretchen Whitmer is running for a second term in office after defeating Bill Schuette by 9.6% in 2018. So Gretchen Whitmer right now is in a very solid position going into her re-election. If you look at the polling data between her and all of the potential Republicans that she may face, Gretchen Whitmer, according to the latest polls, leads by over 30% against all of them. Now, obviously, she is probably not going to win by any margin close to that. She is most likely going to win by around 10%, so a little bit less than that in all likelihood. But Gretchen Whitmer right now is in a very good position, and the reason being is because James Craig, the former frontrunner for the GOP, was disqualified after not filing enough valid signatures to appear on the ballot. So after he was disqualified in late May, we now have four new frontrunners on the GOP side. We have Tudor Dixon, Ryan Kelly, Kevin Rinke, and Garrett Soldano. None of these candidates have big name recognition in the state, and as you can see here, a majority of voters are still undecided as to who to back. So really, the primary can go any way here for either of these candidates. Ryan Kelly may be ahead, but he only has 18% support, and of course, with the majority of voters still being undecided. So right now, the Michigan primary can go any way for any of these candidates, but Gretchen Whitmer is polling very solidly against all of them, and she is probably going to hold on to this advantage that she has going into November, just because of the fact that none of these four candidates really are all that great. James Craig was the only one with a chance at defeating Gretchen Whitmer. If you look at the race before Craig was disqualified, as you can see here, Gretchen Whitmer's odds were basically at around the 50 range. It was basically a pure toss-up in the Michigan gubernatorial election, but as of now, the Democratic Party has a 77% chance at winning the Michigan gubernatorial election with incumbent Gretchen Whitmer. So right now, I'm going to categorize Michigan as being likely for the Democratic Party. I do think that she will end up winning by over 5%, but I don't think the margin is quite going to go into the double digits. If you look at the last couple of elections in Michigan on the Senate level, at least, they have been very close. In 2020, Gary Peters only won his re-election against John James by 1.7%. This was over a percentage point worse than Joe Biden's margin here on the presidential level. Of course, in 2018, it was also a relatively strong victory for Debbie Stabenow, who won by 6.5%. 2018 was a good year for the Democrats because Debbie Stabenow won by 6.5% in Michigan, and in 2018, of course, Gretchen Whitmer won by 9.6% against Bill Schuette. So the state of Michigan has been pretty good for the Democratic Party over the last couple of years. Two Democratic senators as well as a Democratic governor. But if you look on the presidential level, of course, in 2016, Michigan was one of the three states that helped Donald Trump win the presidential election. So these upper Midwestern regions, specifically Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, have been crucial in the last two presidential elections. They basically decided the last two presidential elections. If you look at Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, the votes here basically helped Joe Biden secure victory over Donald Trump in 2020. Yes, Biden also won Georgia and Arizona, but the margins were much smaller. In 2016, these three flips were the ones that won Donald Trump the presidential election. If Trump did not win these three states, he would not have become president. Of course, the margins here were very, very close. If you look at 2012, it was much more solid. The upper Midwestern region has had a very long Democratic history. However, as the populations there are declining or not gaining at the same rate as the country, the upper Midwest is shifting to the right. If you look at previous presidential elections, the last time Michigan and Pennsylvania voted for a Republican was in 1988. For Wisconsin, it was 1984. And for Minnesota, the last time it voted for a Republican was all the way back in 1972 with Richard Nixon. So really, the upper Midwest has become very blue over the last couple of decades, up until basically the mid-2010s, when it took a drastic shift to the right. And so that is why these races are going to be so important, and they really are going to be very competitive at the end of the day. So Michigan is probably going to be the least competitive of the races that we will be going over in this video. Next up, I will move on to the Senate race in the state of Pennsylvania. This is the one that the Democratic Party has the highest chance of winning. So looking at the Pennsylvania Senate race, it will be between Mehmet Oz and John Fetterman. Of course, Mehmet Oz barely won his primary. John Fetterman defeated Connor Lamb very soundly in the Democratic primary in Pennsylvania. So both of these candidates are not the incumbent. Of course, Pat Toomey will not be running for a third term in office. So as of right now, Mehmet Oz is polling terribly against John Fetterman. If you look at the 3 polls that have been released, John Fetterman leads by 4, 6, and 9 percentage points. These polls were all released in the middle of the month of June, and Mehmet Oz is not even close to John Fetterman in any of the polls that have been released. And so right now, the Democratic Party actually has a 60% chance at winning this race. Just a couple of weeks ago, it was basically an even race, just like we had in Michigan. But right now, John Fetterman is heavily favored to win his first term in office as a U.S. Senator against Mehmet Oz. So I do think that the race in Pennsylvania is going to be a lot closer than what the polls suggest. But I do think that the Democratic Party will be able to flip this state if things continue to go so well for them. Of course, if you look at all the polling here, it has been pretty terrible for Mehmet Oz. The Republican Party, I think, made a mistake with nominating him. Of course, Mehmet Oz did gain the late endorsement of Donald Trump, and that is what helped him over the top. If you look at the other candidates in the race on the Republican side, I think that David McCormick would have been a much better nominee. He only lost to Mehmet Oz by less than 1,000 votes, with over 1.3 million votes being cast. And I mean, Mehmet Oz is just one of the many terrible candidates that the Republican Party has nominated this cycle, and I think it is going to hurt them. If Pennsylvania goes blue, it is going to be bad for the Republican Party, because if Pennsylvania votes for the Democrats, they only have to win 2 out of the 3 states of Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia where they have incumbents in, and they are pretty likely to win in Arizona. Nevada and Georgia are still pretty much pure toss-ups at this point, but with Pennsylvania secured on the Democratic side, it will make the Democrats' chances of holding the Senate majority much, much higher. So right now, I will categorize the state of Pennsylvania as being lean for the Democratic Party. Obviously, it is still going to be a very close race no matter what the polls tell you, but I do think that Pennsylvania is going to vote for John Fetterman by over 1% against Mehmet Oz. And we also, of course, have a very high-profile governor's race in Pennsylvania, another race in which the Republican Party has nominated a horrible candidate, and this time it is Doug Mastriano. Doug Mastriano will be running against Josh Shapiro. Josh Shapiro is the incumbent lieutenant governor. Of course, in 2018, Tom Wolf was reelected by 18% over Scott Wagner. This was a blowout victory for the Democratic Party in 2018, which of course was a very good year, specifically in the upper Midwestern region, and that is likely because of the fact that the Democratic Party of course lost the upper Midwest in 2016. All of the Senate races here, as well as the presidential races, they all went to the GOP. So in 2018, voters in the upper Midwest on the Democratic side came out a lot more than they did previously, and so that is what helped the Democratic Party secure such strong victories in all of these states. And so in the state of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro is performing well against Doug Mastriano, but he is doing worse than John Fetterman. If you look at the polling release for the governor's race in Pennsylvania, you'll see here that Josh Shapiro leads by 3 and 4 percentage points in the last 3 polls released. These are the same polls, they polled the same people as the ones that you saw John Fetterman lead over Mehmet Oz in, and John Fetterman led by a much stronger margin than Josh Shapiro in all of these polls that were released. So it is clear that John Fetterman is doing better than Josh Shapiro. If Shapiro wins his governor's race, John Fetterman is likely to win his Senate race, very, very likely to win his Senate race. But if you look at the odds here for Shapiro, he currently has a 67% chance at winning this race. He is actually more favored than John Fetterman to win. However, I do think that John Fetterman is in a better position than Josh Shapiro. And if you look at the numbers here, once Doug Mastriano was nominated, the Republican Party odds went down significantly as a result, because of course Doug Mastriano just is not a good candidate in such a purple state. He is probably not going to win over most of those key independent voters like Josh Shapiro is likely to do. So In the Pennsylvania gubernatorial election, I will categorize it as being lean for the Democratic Party as well. I think that right now in the two Pennsylvania races, the Democratic Party is heavily favored here. Of course, on the gubernatorial level in 2018, Pennsylvania voted for Tom Wolf by 17%, and he is probably going to help the Democrats continue to hold on to the governorship in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania right now, I think, is pretty secure for the Democratic Party. They are still going to have to work very much for it, but I do think that they go into the race with a significant advantage. But if you look at the state of Wisconsin, I think this race is going to be a lot closer on the gubernatorial level, but we're actually going to look at the Senate race here first with Ron Johnson running for re-election. So Ron Johnson is running for a third term in office despite previously saying that he would not, but he was pressured into it by Donald Trump and a lot of Republicans who wanted Wisconsin to stay red, because Ron Johnson, even though he is massively unpopular, he is still the incumbent and the Republican with the best chance at keeping the seat red after these midterm elections. And so if you look at the Democratic side, we do still have a pretty contested primary. Mandela Barnes, though, currently is the front runner in this race. He is the incumbent lieutenant governor. I think Mandela Barnes is going to end up being the nominee. Not too many polls have been released over the last couple of weeks, but Mandela Barnes has led in every single poll that has been released. So I'm confident that he's going to end up winning, but his support really has dropped over the last couple of months here. But in the Wisconsin Senate race, it is still a race that favors Ron Johnson. The only poll, though, does show Mandela Barnes up by 2%, but Ron Johnson still has a 65% chance of winning. Now, this is down from just the 20th of June. If you look at the numbers here, Ron Johnson's odds were a little bit higher. Roe v. Wade is not going to help him either, but the main reason why his odds declined is because of the fact that it was revealed that Ron Johnson did try to overturn the 2020 election results by giving Mike Pence fake electors, and so that is going to hurt him in a state that Joe Biden won on the presidential level in 2020. So I think that Ron Johnson is a pretty vulnerable Republican. He is not popular in his state, but Mandela Barnes really is not that great of a candidate either. There's nothing too significant about him. I do think that the race will still go for the GOP, but I do think that it will still be a very competitive one, and Democrats are probably going to try their hardest to end up winning this race as well. I do think the Democratic Party is going to pump up money into Wisconsin in the coming months. Ron Johnson really is very vulnerable, but given the national environment and how it favors the GOP, I really doubt Wisconsin is going to flip this time around. If you look at the presidential race, I mean, Joe Biden still only won Wisconsin by 0.63. That was actually a smaller margin than Trump's margin in Wisconsin just 4 years prior. So right now in the Wisconsin Senate race, I'm going to categorize it as being lean for the Republicans. I do think they will end up holding on to it, but it will still be a very close race nonetheless. Now, looking at the governor's race in the state of Wisconsin, this one I think is much more of a pure toss-up, with Tony Evers running for a second term in office. So in 2018, Scott Walker was running for a third term. There are no term limits in Wisconsin, but Tony Evers was able to defeat Walker, and that was a pretty impressive win for the Democratic Party. But this time around, it will be much more difficult for Tony Evers. So basically, since the 1990s, the incumbent party in the White House has lost the Wisconsin gubernatorial election. So with Joe Biden as the Democratic president, it will mean that historical trends are against Tony Evers. Now, obviously, these are just trends. This is not an actual rule. Tony Evers is still a very good candidate in this race. Currently, he is expected to face either Rebecca Kleefisch or Tim Mitchells. Personally, I think it will be Tim Mitchells that comes out on top. Mitchells did gain the endorsement of Donald Trump. This was the big one. He also got the endorsement of Tommy Thompson, former governor of Wisconsin. Thompson was the last Republican to win a Wisconsin gubernatorial election with a Republican president in office. So Tommy Thompson was a very popular four-term governor in the state of Wisconsin. But right now, if you look at the primary, Tim Mitchells has led in the two latest polls. However, these are relatively weak margins, so the primary really can still go either way. But Rebecca Kleefisch is probably going to lose the primary that she's been leading in for the past year. So Tim Mitchells is probably going to end up going against Tony Evers. And if you look at the betting markets for this race, I mean, the odds have improved significantly for Tony Evers over the last couple of weeks here. At one point in late June, he only had a 35% chance of winning. Now he has a 48% chance of winning. So this race is pretty much a coin toss at this point, and we're really just gonna have to see what comes out in terms of data for this race in the coming weeks. Of course, if you do look at the latest poll, Tony Evers does lead by 7% over Tim Mitchells. This is still an early poll, though. Tim Mitchells has not even secured the nomination yet, so we're just gonna have to see what happens in the coming months. I do think Tony Evers is in a stronger position than he was before. Roe v. Wade is going to help him. Wisconsin is still still a pro-choice state. So in the Wisconsin gubernatorial election, I'm going to categorize it as being tilt for the Democratic Party. I think Tony Evers has a very slight advantage, but this race really could go either way in the end. And finally, in the Minnesota gubernatorial election, we have a big race here as well. I think Minnesota is going to be closer than it was last time. Of course, in 2018, Tim Walz won his first election by 11%. That is likely not going to happen this time around. In 2018, of course, Jeff Johnson was a very mediocre nominee on the Republican side, but Tim Walz was able to defeat him pretty soundly. And so this time around, it will still be a race that Tim Walz is heavily favored in, but if you look at the latest polling numbers, it does show that he is much more vulnerable than he was last time. In 2018, his polling numbers were significantly better. However, this time around, you'll see that against Scott Jensen is the Republican frontrunner currently for the nomination. Tim Walz only leads by 2 points in the latest poll, in one conducted in mid or early May. Jensen was only down by 5%. So Tim Walz has done better against the other potential Republican nominees. However, against the one that matters, Scott Jensen, Tim Walz is showing that he is still relatively vulnerable. If you look at his odds of winning, though, his odds are higher than every other Democratic governor that is running for their re-election. Currently, Tim Walz has an 82% chance of winning Minnesota. That is simply because of the fact that the state of Minnesota is still a state that favors the Democratic Party. Even though Hillary Clinton almost lost Minnesota in 2016, she still did end up winning it. And of course, Joe Biden won Minnesota by 7% in 2020. So the upper Midwestern region right now still favors the Democratic Party. It is still a Democratic leading area. However, in the next decade, the region is likely to continue to shift to the right as the Sun Belt shifts to the left. So we're going to see more Democratic victories in states like Arizona and Georgia, maybe even Texas in a couple of decades. But the Midwestern region is not trending well for the Democrats. And so right now, it is still a very important region, as it is probably one of the most neutral regions in the country, politically speaking. And so right now, I do think the Democratic Party is going to win in Pennsylvania. Republicans, I do believe, will win in Wisconsin on the Senate level, but on the gubernatorial level, I have all 4 of the governor's races going for the Democrats, but Wisconsin, I do think, really could go either way. In Minnesota, I'm obviously going to put as lean Democratic. I do think Tim Walz is going to win by under 5% this time, but still, I do think that he is going to win. So right now, the Democratic Party is doing well in the upper Midwestern region, and we're just going to have to see what comes out of those primary races in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and as well, of course, Michigan, which is the big one. And so yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.